Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. Greetings, salutations, 10,000 blessings upon your head. My name is Reverend Phoenix Coffin Williams, and welcome to the second season, the official kickoff of the second season of Fridays with Phoenix, where every Friday for the next, including this week, 15 weeks, we will be delving pretty deeply into one particular or specific topic. Last time, or for the first season, it was really kind of a soft launch. I had taken over this spot and I had taken over this segment from my predecessor, Reverend Don Lewis. And so it was a little bit more disorganized. It was a little bit more based on some stuff that I was able to, stuff that like I was inspired to speak on, think about, or draw attention to, based on like the various inspirations that I have gotten. But this second season is going to be more organized, and it's going to be more linear, and it's going to be based on a topic that I am very, very passionate about, that I have built my own spiritual studies around, the topics that I have been studying a lot of since I was a child, and they have kind of manifested into my personal and public practice and ministry. The topic is Kemeticism, Kemetic philosophy, Kemetic theology, however you want to think about it. But it is the study and the applications of the teachings that came from ancient Egypt or the land of Kemet or the land of Tamara, depending on, where your studies have taught you. For me, Kemeticism really is it. One, it comes from the land where everything originated. It comes from the continent where everything originated. And as I've said before in other discussions about the topic, Ma'at really is for everyone. Mayat, however y'all found yourselves pronouncing that name, it really is for everyone. And the teachings of Kemeticism have led to the flourishing of empires. Wherever these teachings go, an empire pops up and does great. And when the teachings become bastardized or forsaken, the empire finds its upheaval or it finds its destruction. A lot of people might recognize some of the names and the divinities of the Kemetic spirituality or the Kemetic faith and philosophy because they have been moved into or they have been syncretized or superimposed over other very popular theologies or pantheons, most notably the Greeks. The Greeks did a phenomenal job at linking their divinities with the divinities of Kemet, of Egypt. So much so that their philosophy that they got known for, Hermeticism, is really just a Greek application of Kemetic faith and Kemetic spirituality. What a lot of folks might not understand or recognize is that many of the most prominent teachers in Greece went to studied in other educational systems. The Greek teacher and philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, for example, studied in Egyptian temples, studied in Babylonian temples, and brought that information back to Greece and applied it in their area. And the same is true for a lot of the other Greek notables. They went from place to place outside of Greece, studied, learned, did their thing, got their knowledge, and then brought it back home and applied it at home so that they could help their Greek empire or their Greek city-states or the organization of the Greek culture thrive and have a golden age. For me, I really do enjoy going back to where it began or where the information came from. So I do appreciate looking at the hieroglyphic text. I do appreciate figuring out the sounds that the images make. I do appreciate reading the scriptures and the mythologies and the lore directly from its source wherever possible. So, for example, like I do prefer to go, like, if ever there is a book, if ever there is a resource that references a hieroglyphic text, I prefer to go back and see exactly what the hieroglyphic text said and get the context from its origins. I prefer to go to the primary source. And so that's my due diligence. And what I have found is that, one, a lot of, if not all, of our modern Western pagan practices, order traditions, the Wiccan faith, all of them have their origins in Egyptian and Kemetic philosophy. The temple systems and the coven systems are very much reminiscent of the Kemetic way of having a temple, where there might be several temples or multiple temples in the area, but like there was a network that connected them all. And so for us in modern times, there might be many covens or many temples in an area. However, the network of the high priesthood is a connection, and they work together with each other to maintain the consistency of the teachings, who keep the highest parts of the traditions and make sure that the spirits are tended to at the highest level while they disseminate the information through the network of covens and temples or orders or shrines or what have you. The divinities that are in the Hermetic traditions or the lodges, like the Golden Dawn, for example, they are an amalgamation of Kemetic or Egyptian divinities and some Egyptian divinities, as well as some Babylonian divinities, representing perhaps the route that some of the Greek masters took to get their masters, to get their education, to get their inspiration. So with all that being said, and we can talk a lot more about some specific philosophies and how they got changed or warped or expanded on when they got disseminated out of Kemet. But today I want to talk specifically about origin stories. And in the Kemetic tradition, the divinities and their personization, their personification, the anthropomorphism and the zoomorphism, all of it works together to communicate some important wisdom about the nature of life, about how the universe came into being, about ways to maintain the divine order. And many of the teachers of these philosophies, a lot of the stuff that they said, even way back then, are very useful and helpful for us today. For example, and this is kind of like a little tangent, but for example, the teachings of Amen Em Opet is a powerful teaching that really equates to psychology from a Kemetic perspective. And While I won't talk about that ancestor or those particular teachings today, I will be talking about those. And if any of y'all have known me, if any of you have met me or followed any of the work that I do in my tradition, you know that psychology, mental health, behavioral health, and the combination of that with divine inspiration is absolutely my jam. And so I am excited to talk about the ways that the maybe origins of transpersonal psychology rest within some of the teachings of that sage. I'm an Emopet. But today I want to talk about the origin story and maybe start to talk about what some of the principles are behind the story, or what some of the principles we're supposed to understand are. And again, before I get to the story, I want to say that all of the myths about the divinities, about how they act and interact with each other, while they take on very human attributes and they take on these forms that we can and behaviors that we can recognize, all of them are allegorical. That means that we're not meant to take them literally, but we are meant to derive some deeper meaning or deeper purpose from them for the benefit of our evolution, for the benefit of purifying our own egos, for the benefit of helping us understand how to approach life on life's terms. And so with that being said, I will go into origin story, and I will also talk about how the origin story sets the role for why the altar, and my particular altar, is set up the way that it is. First and foremost, in the beginning, everything was united and complete, everything was unified, and there were only the still waters of noon. There was no concept of darkness, there was no concept of light or anything like that. Just the still waters of noon, and everything existed in that blackness. However, out of sheer force of will, and will is one of those concepts that moves throughout various modern Western theologies and concepts. But out of sheer will, out of divine will, the first being emerged from the deep, deep and consolidated waters of noon. And that divine being, depending on where you are in the land of Kemet, goes by a different name. Perhaps Atum, perhaps Amun, perhaps Ra. And this divinity has multiple aspects to itself. This divinity, while often understood to be a male or a man, is actually quite androgynous if you consider the way that like the story unfolds, or if you consider the aspects of this divinity. Without a doubt, the waters of noon, 100% androgynous. No concepts of sexes or genders or anything in there. But out of the sheer force of will, the first God creates himself. And some of the epithets are the self-created God, the God who has no creator, the God who creates himself, the God who willed himself into being. All of these concepts are meant to describe this first divinity. And so from there, this God pulls himself out of the deep, dark waters of noon and immediately moves into the act of creating the rest of the universe. This first self-created God, if you know anything about Ra or Amun or what have you, know that they are frequently depicted as sunshine or as the sun itself, which lets us know right off the bat that Kemeticism and the theology of ancient Egypt is based on the movements of the sun based on the power of the sun. And for them, the sunshine, or the sun in our cosmos, like the center of our solar system, was the source of life and light on the planet. From their own creation, Atum created the first land, and this was called the Benben stone. And if you want to maybe have a picture or a symbol that helps conceptualize this, think about the modern symbol that the alchemists used to represent the sun. It's a circle with the dot in the center. That circle with the dot in the center actually represents the creation of the first land. So that dot is where Atum was standing, and the circle part represents the boundaries of the waters of Noon that were separated and moved and parted to create the first land. Deeper into the Kemetic mysticism and the philosophy shows that actually it's the top of the obelisk, this point right here. If you can see this, like this point right here is actually the dot in the symbol for the sun. And as the waters start to part and recede, more of the obelisk is revealed. And we will talk more about the obelisk later. But in short, the obelisk that has its origins on the ground in the earth and reaches up into the sky is said to be the phallus or the penis of the god Geb. But we'll get to Geb in a second. The act of creation, the thing that propelled creation into existence, was actually an act of masturbation by the god Atum. And so what he did was he gave himself a moment of pleasure, a moment of ecstasy, and he ejaculated his seed, which led to more of the creative aspects. And it is said that the hand that he used to pleasure himself, to ejaculate with, was the goddess Hathor, or Het Heru. And so while she was not created from him or by him, she is actually an aspect of him. And this goddess is considered a supreme being unto herself, as both the hand and the right eye of this creator divinity. There are two other divinities in the company of gods that also function as supreme beings unto themselves, because they were not created by Atum, they are aspects of him. We will get to those other ones shortly, of course. I know I keep saying that, but I'm trying to set a decent foundation here. So Atum created himself out of the deep, still, dark waters of Noon, and through a divine act of masturbation and ecstasy with his hand, who is Hathor, ejaculated his seed and led to some creation. The first two children that he begot were Shu and Tefnut. They are moisture and air. Those two would go on to also embrace and mate, and they would give rise to the grandchildren of Atum, Geb and Nut. Geb is earth and Nut is sky. And so if you think back to a few seconds ago when I said that the obelisk was the phallus or the penis of Geb, Geb was the ground, was the earth, literally the planet Earth, as well as anything that sprang out of the earth. And his sister companion, Nut, was the sky. And in her body, everything was suspended in their orbits. So all of the stars in the sky, all of the galaxies, all of the planets, all of that, that was her body. And in in like the depictions, you would often see her, Newt, suspended over Geb in such a way as like the starry sky would encapsulate over the earth. Geb and Newt were so close together, they loved each other so much, and their embrace was so tight that originally and initially they were just like stuck together, meaning the phallus of Geb was securely in place inside the body of Newt. And for creation purposes, perhaps we know where the phallus is placed when the act of creation is the goal. It had come to be known by Atum, by the creator, that the children of Geb and Newt would be very, very powerful. And maybe out of fear, maybe out of hope, maybe out of divine knowing, maybe out of a desire to see the replication of himself over and over again, Atum called on his daughter Tefnut and was like, hey, separate those two. And so Tefnut, who was the heir, goes and gets in between their children and separates their two bodies. So Shu and Tefnut represent first order creation after the creator, and Geb and Newt represent second order creation after the creator, Atum. And it's important to recognize the numbers that are being generated at this point. So originally, there was everything. And then when Atum created himself, there was one. Then from himself begot two other divinities. And then those two divinities begot two more divinities. Now, due to the separation of Geb and Newt, Newt became pregnant with, some say 5, some say 4 children. Atum made a decree that Newt would not be able to give birth to any of these children on any of the days of the calendar that already existed. And at this time, it was 360 days in the calendar. And so Newt, heavy with labor, had 4, maybe 5 kids in her. These kids were destined to do great things, but for some reason, Atum, the creator, was like, nope, not gonna give birth. She traveled, wondering what could be done, and of course, she comes across the wisest and the most intelligent of all the gods, Jehuti, also known as Thoth. The Greeks syncretized him with their own Hermes and gave him the name Hermes Trismegistus. And so that is one of the translations of Kemeticism into Hermeticism, is the grabbing of Jehuti and reclassifying him as their Hermes. But Newt goes to Jehuti and is like, hey, like I am pregnant down, 4, maybe 5 kids in me. And the creator has forbidden me from giving birth on any of the days that already exist. And so if you remember how I said that Het-Heru or Hathor was an aspect of the creator, was the right eye, the hand, what have you, Jehuti or Thoth, Tot, also an aspect of the creator and represents that divine wisdom and that divine intellect. And so there's not a myth or a creation story that involves when Het-Heru and when Jehuti came into being. They are aspects of this divine creator. And there's one more divinity who also encompasses that as well. But Jehuti knows that there is no way to go against the order of Atum. There's no way to get her to give birth or find a place for her to give birth in the 360 days that currently exist. So, in being wise, Jehuti's like, fine, guess we have to come up with some other days so that you can go into labor and you can give birth to these divinities that are going to be here. Jehuti goes over to the moon god Khonshu, and is like, this dude loves a good bargain. Challenges Khonshu to several games in which, in exchange for if Jehuti wins, Khonshu would give over some slivers of moonlight, and if Khonshu wins, then Jehuti would give some magic or some words of power or what have you. Either way, Jehuti made it worth Khonshu's while, and they set out playing these games, and each time Jehuti wins, being the smartest, the most wise, the one who not only knows, but also knows how to apply intelligence in that kind of way, was not going to be beaten. And so after a while, Jehuti had enough slivers of moonlight to fashion 5 new days. And so with these 5 new days, Nut now had plenty of time to give birth to her children that were begotten by her brother and her consort, the earth. These 5 children, Al-Sar, Aset, Nebhet, Sutek, Heru-Ur, also known as Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. From this point on, the stories of the divinities take on a lot more of the human attributes. We know that there was some qualms and some struggles between Sutek and Alsar. We know that there was an affair between Alsar and Nebhet that led to the birth of Anpu. We know that the troubles between Alsar and Sutek led to the murder of Alsar and led to Alset doing a bunch of magic to resurrect him so that she can become divinely inoculated, knocked up, impregnated, so that she could give birth to a legitimate heir, Heru or Horus the Younger. But that right there, the story of, those divinities, that makes up what we would call the Asarian theology. And for the purpose of today, what I want to convey is that the story of creation, from Atum all the way down to the 4 or 5 divinities that Nut gave birth to, they not only represent the order of creation from Big Bang all the way down to civilization, they also represent principles of our personality that must be mastered in order for us to attain enlightenment. If you are familiar with the ideas of involution and evolution, involution is the process of going from the deep, dark waters of noon to the presence of humanity full of emotions and thoughts and egos. And then evolution is the process of reconciling our personalities so that we remember our individualized divinity, that we make more connection to our higher selves, and we return back to this place of unity with all of the divine. How does this translate into the altar? Well, the altar cloth represents, the black altar cloth represents the deep, dark waters of noon for which every single thing has its origin. Some people choose red, orange, yellow, what have you, depending on their own personal orientation. Um, but this right here, this represents the Benben stone, or this represents the place that was first created to be like the first land. This was the first spot that Atum placed their feet upon. It's the top of the obelisk. Um, it is the center of the dot in the circle, and the dot that represents the symbol for the sun. And then from there, all of the other aspects of creation take form. Each divinity that I have mentioned, Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Aset, Asar, Sutek, Netet, Heruer, Anpu, Khonsu, all of the divinities represent some kind of, in their relationships with each other, represent some kind of principle that helps us recognize the order of the universe. They are also mathematical equations because according to the Kemetics, mathematics is something that frees us from obscurity. Mathematics is a thing that, you balance the equations, then you have balance. And it helps us recognize that perhaps things don't have to be in equal measure in order to be balanced. So, for example, in a wonderful cup of iced tea, the iced tea is the final balanced product, but it takes different parts water, different parts tea, different parts lemon, different parts sugar. So each of the individual components, just like in our personalities, we have one complete personality that represents our lower soul or our lower self. However, transcending those, mastering them, recognizing them, helps us reconcile with our higher self, the part of us that always remembers our origin within the divine creator, that always remembers our identity as being the divine creator. One of the other things that's important to think about is the concept of the mind within Kemeticism. In that philosophy, in that theology, we are all a dream in the divine mind of the creator. And we are connected and replicates of the divine creator because we have minds and we have the ability to dream. We have the ability to imagine. And we have the ability to create based on these dreams and these imaginations, just as the creator does. I think that's about it for now. I did go a little bit over time, but I will be back next week to highlight a specific divinity. So we started off with Atum. I will be back next week on Friday, same time, same place, to highlight a different divinity. And as we move forward over the next 15 weeks, you can expect to be privy to some path workings, to some divination techniques, to some magic, things that can help you reconcile your lower self with your higher self, things that will help you understand more about Kemetic theurgy and how you can approach the divinities of ancient Egypt for your own highest good and for the betterment of your communities. Hopefully you found this helpful. Again, my name is Reverend Phoenix, and until next time, may you blessed be, folks.